to A Girl in Love with Tech podcast. My name is Rachel Rabo. I'm a Microsoft Power Platform developer, Dynamics 365 CRM developer, and also a Microsoft MVP. And our lovely guest for today is April. Hi.
Hello. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is April Spate. I'm a principal cloud advocate at Microsoft within our AI team and cloud advocacy. And my primary area of focus is responsible AI, which I think is perfect for this conversation.
Yes, definitely. And I'm currently doing a series where I've spoken a lot so much about AI, and it's amazing to continue that series today. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you. And our topic for today, we are talking about is AI ethics and responsible innovation. So there are a lot
Mhm.
of questions that people do not have an idea about. So we are going to be looking at those questions, and April is going to giving us answers to those questions. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead with my first question. So like AI right now is actually on a move. Everything is happening so fast.
Yes.
You just wake up today and you see that there is a new tool or something has changed in the AI world. So it's amazing, but very, very fast. So, what do you think that people should be like? What do you think people should be biggest challenges of ethical? What are the biggest challenges in AI development when it comes to responsibility?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things at the moment, at least, is going to be how do we mitigate risk and
Okay.
how do we mitigate things like hallucinations happening. So, for those who may not
Yeah.
know what hallucinations are, that's essentially when a large language model, let's take one of like the AI assistants that we happen to use, it's when
Okay.
it provides false information. And it may not necessarily be intentionally providing false information, but it provides this false information and it passes it on as though it is factual information.
Yeah.
Well, the thing with that is the information's not true. But when you aren't aware of that, you may take whatever it provides to you as like the gospel and as truth, and then that's what you think something is. And that in itself can be a really big issue because the more that we see folks using generative AI to generate
Yeah.
things like content, articles, generate different things to make like decisions or even like business
Yeah.
decisions,
Yeah.
if we are receiving false information from the
Mhm.
language models and we don't know we have false information, that can lead
Yes.
to some really big consequences down the line. So I would say right now, uh, dealing with hallucinations, that's a really big challenge that I think everyone should be aware of, whether you're a developer or you're just an
Yeah.
everyday generative AI user. That's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning it and letting us know about it. And the next question I have for you is that, especially when it comes to tech leaders, when they have, what are the biggest challenges do you think they might have? Like,
Yeah,
when,
so in terms of tech leaders, I would say one of the things is understanding who in your team is responsible for what when you are creating or developing an app. While someone like myself, for example, if I did my own solo project just for fun at home, there's a lot of hats that I wear in that process because
yes,
I can play the project manager, I can play the developer, I can play the designer, all these
yeah,
different roles. But when you're working with a team of individuals, I think it's really important to understand how we divide these roles, who's responsible for what as well, and just be
yeah,
very clear about that too. When you are creating any sort of AI system that's run on generative models or large language models, I would say, is just
okay,
really important to get an understanding of who in your team is going to do what. That helps establish some accountability, for one. Also,
yeah,
if you have individuals in your team that have certain subject matter expertise in certain areas of what we call the generative AI ops, in terms of like the life cycle of building apps, place those
okay,
people in those positions because that's where they're going to shine. At the
Yeah.
same time, though, I do feel that it's important, even if you're there to serve one role, that you have a general idea of what the other folks on your team are doing as well, because that helps get an understanding of the impact that a decision that you make may have on someone else in your team and the work that they're doing as well. So for technical leaders, I would say if you have a team of folks that you're working with, be clear on how you are dividing the roles and the scope of each role of the individual that's involved in creating the app itself.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I have a question. I think the mic is echoing. Can you hear me clearly now?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So the next question I have is that you talked about hallucination, but my next question is related to that. Like, what areas in ethical AI do you think that people overlook?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So one area that may be overlooked would be some of the topics that we deal with around just observability as a whole, because everybody wants to create the app, and that's fine. Creating the app's fun. I totally get that. But once you have that app created, there's other things that you need to do as well. So if we look at things from the observability perspective, starting off with like your model choice, that has a really big impact on how pretty much everything else turns out. But beyond your model choice, being sure that you have things like tracing enabled, so that way you can see what are the steps that your AI assistant or agent's going through to derive whatever the output is that's coming from it. That's also going to help you with debugging as well, especially if you have really complex setups. The next
Yeah.
thing would be evaluations as well.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
really important one too, just
Yeah.
given that we get these great responses, but if we're not evaluating the or assessing like the effectiveness of the response, whether it's the performance
Yeah.
or the quality or the risk and safety, that can be very troubling as well, because just because we get our output from a system doesn't mean it's the best output. And the only way we can
Yeah.
determine that
Yeah.
it's the best for the use case is if we're doing evaluations. And we don't just do evaluations once, we do them continuously. This is something that you should be
Yeah.
doing throughout the life of the app that you've created, even after you've deployed. And speaking of
Yeah.
deploying, once you've gotten to that point, you're going to want to monitor your app itself. So yes, you should
Okay.
monitor how the outputs are assessed with respect to the evaluations I mentioned. But then there's other aspects that you also need to get an idea of, like token usage, like that impacts costs, and you want to keep an
Okay.
eye on these things. User feedback as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
For most of the tools that we've used, there's usually some sort of like thumbs up, thumbs down sort
Yeah.
of feedback.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
We as developers should look at that information, because it helps identify where we can make improvements in the systems that we create. So
Yeah.
if we notice in a certain period of time that we have a lot of thumbs down for something, that should be an
Yeah.
indicator that there's an issue happening. And the only way you
Yeah.
can really
Red
get to
flag.
that, yes, the only way you can get to that is if you're capturing that information and if you're monitoring as well. And then
Yeah.
from there, that's when it's the responsibility of your team to go and look at this feedback and make whatever modifications necessary. Now, once you make the modifications, you don't just deploy and go about your day. You now have to do
Okay.
more evaluations, because just because you make one change, you don't know what impact overall it can have on the rest of the experience. So you're going
Yeah.
to want
That's
to keep
very true.
evaluating over and over and over again. And so while I may have mentioned a lot of things that may be overlooked, they all go together. And these are things that you should be doing when you're creating the different AI apps and experiences that a lot of folks are talking about online and in person.
Yes, and I love how you pointed so much on evaluation. It's very important during the building, the development process, during the testing process, even after the deployment process, and also when you make updates to that particular tool. Because a lot of people, they do not think of that. They just think
No.
about the process of just building it, testing it, and
Mhm.
then deploying it. Yeah. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
even from like the testing perspective, we have to
yeah,
be very intentional with how we test, because there's one perspective to test like the happy path. where everything goes right, the user's
Yes.
using the tool the way they're supposed to, but you
Yeah.
also want to test for adversarial tasks, the negative or the bad things that people are going to also pass into your
Yeah.
system. You should test for that too, because you just never know how the end user is going to use your product.
Yeah. Thank you. That's true. You really never know how a user or a customer is going to use your products. That's a very, very good advice.
Yeah.
Even outside of AI, there are other tools or platform the that is created, and people use it differently than what it was
Hmm.
created for. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, and another next question I have to ask you is that for those who are trying to integrate AI into their businesses, so how can they be careful and keep themselves on being responsible with AI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say one thing to consider doing is
Yeah.
adopting their own set of like an AI standard. So, like at Microsoft, we have an AI standard that we follow, and if you're not familiar, it's where we have like our guidance around our principles that we have. So,
Yeah.
from a company perspective, I think starting there is super helpful because it more or less provides a North Star, because
Yeah.
the way you defined your like responsible AI principles should really guide how you do everything else from there on out for whatever app you're creating. So if you're thinking about adding a feature to your app, if it is not in alignment with your principles, that's a key
Yeah.
indicator that you probably shouldn't be adding that feature into your app, or there may need to be further refinement that you need to do to be more on par with the principles that your company has like established for themselves. So I would
Yeah.
say that would be probably honestly my first thing I would consider, because if you
Okay.
have those principles, that will literally help with answering whether you should or should not do something for whatever it is that you're creating.
Yeah, it's like setting a goal and
Yeah.
following that goal at every stage. Yeah,
Yes.
that's amazing. Yes,
Yep.
thank you. And if you're watching this podcast, if you have any question, Ifra is here to answer your question. And I think I have another question. I have like 5 questions, but there's one
Yeah.
question I want to ask, like, especially for we have two sides. We have I'm curious about this. We have two sides. We have the business side and we
Yeah.
have the technical side, which is the developer and the business decisions, tech leaders, and all of them. So, how
Yeah.
do you think these two sides can come together
Yeah.
and make sure that the AI is responsible?
Yeah, so I think both
Yeah.
sides of the group need to have a good understanding of what does it mean to be responsible first and foremost, and
Yeah.
how does that responsibleness, if you will, manifest itself in the way that the company creates whatever products that they have. Now, some
Yeah.
of the things that I think about from a responsible AI side as a developer is probably
Okay.
going to differ than how someone from the business side thinks about responsible AI from their end. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, what does matter is that both groups do have a sense of what it means to be responsible for their business area. And
Yeah.
similar to what I mentioned earlier, this is why it's also important to have at least a general idea of what others in your team are doing, because what you don't want to have happen is someone from the
Yeah.
business side make a decision that
Yes.
now negatively impacts the technical side or the developer side.
Yeah.
So having that awareness of who's doing what, I think, is really helpful. Defining what it means to be responsible, that brings us back to what those principles are as well, and just
Yeah.
making sure that across the company, everyone has this understanding, whether that's a matter of carrying out actual like training, for example, that
Okay.
all
Yeah.
employees
That's
can
good.
do regardless of your role. I think that's super important, because although those two buckets are different in terms of the scope of their day-to-day tasks, there are
Yeah.
still very similar overarching responsible AI related topics that are going to be applicable to both sides. And those are the things that should be taught. Um,
Okay.
really should be mandatory, more or less. I would say, if if you're managing a company and you're really really set on doing something that involves AI,
Yeah.
Make that training mandatory. Make sure everyone knows about it, because one of the worst things that could happen is someone to say, "Oh, I just didn't know,"
Yeah.
And
Very true.
so
Yeah.
that would be something that you want to avoid. And even after you've done the training once, that doesn't mean that's it.
Yeah, they can do it again or a
Yeah,
another step of it. Yeah.
yeah. Whatever cadence makes sense, do another version of the training, especially in this current climate of the industry, because everything's changing so much. So while
Yes.
some things may stay consistent, there will be new things that are coming down the road. I mean, just think about
Yes.
it. For most of last year, we weren't really talking about agents that much, but as
Yeah.
we got towards the end of the year, agents are like everywhere now.
Yeah.
So this is why it's important continue to evolve that training that we're giving our respective workforces, to make sure that we're all knowledgeable, we're up to
Yeah.
date on how things are evolving, and we know
Yeah.
what actions to take when we're forced with making a decision.
Yeah. Especially being up to date. It's very, very important being up to
Mhm.
date. Yeah. Because a lot of things are happening. Like you can just like what I said from the beginning, you can just wake up and you have another news about AI.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have the last question for you. So
Yes.
how will developers and designers change the world of AI solutions, like responsible AI solutions?
Yeah, so I would say, 'cause those are two also different
Yeah.
sides. So when you say designers, I'm thinking of like traditional folks who are doing more of like UI and things of that nature. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, so perfect.
Yeah.
So I would say the two roles definitely should work together. We have something at Microsoft referred to as the Hacks Toolkit, and it's centered around human AI interaction. In that
Okay.
toolkit, we provide design patterns that we
Okay.
recommend you follow when you're creating a system. This is
Yeah.
something that would be applicable to both designers and developers,
Yeah.
because just like in traditional software, as your design team is designing the interfaces and things of that nature, a lot of that's going to impact what the developers are doing, and vice
Yeah.
versa. So
True.
something like the Hacks Toolkit, for example, there's different guidance in there that could be leveraged in providing your guidance when you're creating experiences. And it's things that we already see today. Like I mentioned, the thumbs up and thumbs down
Mm.
functionality,
Yeah.
or the words that we typically see that say like, this is a AI chat, so responses may not
Yeah.
be 100% accurate, whatever. Like
Yeah. Like
those
the
little
disclaimer.
details,
Yes.
yeah, those details are things that are going to be really important for both developers and designers to understand, because
Yes.
when we have things like this that should be placed into the apps that we're building, from a
Yeah.
designer's perspective, you got to think to yourself, okay, where should this actually be in the UI itself? What makes
Yeah.
the most sense? Where is it going to land where the user can see it and not feel
Yeah.
as though we hid it somewhere where they couldn't view
Yeah.
it? From the
True.
developer perspective, when they're building functionality like the user feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down thing, they then need to decide, okay, where am I implementing, or how am I implementing this? Because the
Okay.
designers will probably be the ones that decide where to put it in the experience. The
Yes.
dev team needs to say, well, how am I implementing it? How
Yeah.
is data flowing from when the person clicks a button back to wherever I'm collecting my user feedback? And
Yeah.
then from there, you have the whole team that's doing evaluations and such and monitoring. So,
Yeah.
I know we're looking at things from a designer and developer perspective, but the decisions they make and the things they do impact so many others who are involved in creating whatever apps being created. So I think the two definitely need to work together for sure. Just like in traditional software, you wouldn't have your designers working in a silo as opposed to never interacting with your developers, and vice versa. They should
Yeah.
definitely work together. Some of the principles that we've seen in traditional software development and design, we'll see that carry over into generative AI. We're seeing a lot of that now. We're seeing some standards, more or less, if that's what you want to call them, that
Yeah.
are consistent across different like AI experiences
Yeah.
that we're trying out. So the more things evolve in the industry, the more we're going to see things like that happening, the more developers and designers will continue to work together, and like the UI and the UX of AI is going to
Yeah.
continue to evolve. And so I don't think we're at a point where like there's no more innovation. It's going to keep happening,
Yeah.
but we're going to
Yeah.
evolve together as the innovation continues to evolve.
Yeah. And one thing I love so much too, when it becomes the developer and the designer, like if you
Mhm.
have a prompt and you ask Copilot or ChatGPT or any other AI service, there's actually a disclaimer that also comes with it that tells you that this answer might not be correct. Like in that frame, that this answer might not be correct. You should also try doing your own research. Yeah, it's like a
Yes.
disclaimer just to let you know. Yeah, so it's perfect.
Yes, absolutely. And this is why, slightly off topic but related, this is why we have things now like reasoning models. So if you may have
Yeah,
tried like ChatGPT recently, and I know of like the 4.0 model, before it gives you the answer, there's like this chunk of text that it says reasoning on it, and it shows you like it's I don't want to say thought process because that humanizes the
okay.
AI, and AI doesn't think, but
Yeah,
it reasons over how it gets to the output that it's going to give you. So we're
yeah,
seeing more things like that, which is
yeah,
super helpful because it does give an idea of how we got from A to B after we put a prompt into a system.
yeah,
So we're going to keep seeing that. It's going to continue to evolve. Everything's going to
yeah,
continue to evolve. And so I think because I can definitely speak from the developer perspective, from the dev perspective, like stay up to date on what's happening in like your specific area, but don't feel obligated to know everything and know how to use and do
yeah. That's
everything,
overwhelming.
because yeah, there's not enough
Yeah.
hours in the day to do that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. That will be very, very overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you so much, April. It's amazing having you here on the call
Thank
and being
you.
able to see ethical AI in both sides of the technical and also the business and design. Thank you. And thank you
Yes,
so much, everyone. See you in the next podcast. Bye.